Do you need a break?
You read my mind.
Come with me.
Come with me and join me for another episode of The Break. I'm your host, Father Roderick. I'm a priest and I'm a geek, and I love to share with you my thoughts on Star Wars, science fiction, Star Trek, anime, fantasy, superheroes, and so much more. In this show, I give you my tips on what you can watch, read, play, or listen to the next time you have a break. And let's step into the Millennium Falcon and take a look somewhere in the universe.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
You know that I love to go to that galaxy far, far away. And I'm such a fan of everything that Disney does in the footsteps of Star Wars creator George Lucas. However, I'm not blind and deaf to how Star Wars is perceived elsewhere in the world, and I know that some fans are worried about the future of Star Wars. We've seen a number of television series, and some of them were excellent, and others were kind of, okay, but not as good as we expect Star Wars to be. And this is not the only big franchise that seems to be a bit in a rut, you could say, where the future is a bit more muddy, a bit more misty, and even Disney doesn't really seem to know which road to take. This is also true for the Marvel Cinematic Universe that, of course, has been going strong for more than a decade now after the first Iron Man movie was such a success. And most of the success of the MCU is thanks to one guy, Kevin Feige, who, when he started to work for Disney, soon showed that he had an incredible grip and grasp of what the Marvel Universe could be. All of that was still unknown, or was still to be explored, but right from the get-go, he knew that there was a big story that they could tell, that that Marvel, that Disney had just acquired, offered so many storytelling opportunities. But he knew that in order to keep people coming back for more, these stories needed to be related to one another, which kind of wasn't the case with a lot of superhero movies. Most superhero movies were just either like a single story, or maybe you would get a trilogy like with Spider-Man. But there wasn't a plan when Disney bought Marvel for this whole interconnected universe. Kevin Feige was the one who made sure that they started to develop, on the foundation of the success of Iron Man, this big story that would ultimately result in this bundling of superheroes in the Avengers. And then from there would be another phase and another phase. And so every time he was the one who made sure that that universe stayed consistent between all these different stories. The one thing that he didn't expect, and I don't think that Disney expected it, we the fans did not expect this, was that there is something like too much of a good thing. It's like when you have dessert, and imagine you're in Rome and you're sitting on a nice summer evening. You just had a plate of wonderful pasta, and now you really would like an ice cream, like a good gelato, and you're so looking forward to that gelato that you order like 5 portions, and they bring it in, and it's strawberry and it's a lemon taste, and then you've got another plate with chocolate and vanilla, and then you've got raspberries, blueberries, and every plate also has whipped cream on it. I'm sure that it looks amazing. You're like, oh gosh, I will never leave this place anymore. You start eating, and then after a while you think like, yeah, this gelato is amazing, and now I really would like to take some of that, the vanilla and the pistachio and the chocolate, but I'm full, I need a break. And then I can't even think of the raspberry and strawberry ice cream. It's just too much of a good thing. Well, that's kind of how a lot of Marvel fans have felt recently with this ongoing tsunami of great movies. All these movies are entertaining. They're not all on the level of the Avengers, but they're certainly great, entertaining, good popcorn movies. You always know that you get quality, that it's going to be fun. But in addition to that, we also had a massive amount of television series, especially in the first 2 years of Disney Plus, when Disney was trying to grab market share. They would just finance any idea. And so you got all these series, and because there was so much going on, and Kevin Feige needed to keep track of all these different stories, I sometimes feel like they went about it too quickly, and like, let's just film something and then we'll fix it in post. And that turned out to be a major problem for a number of recent television series, like Captain America, and then more recently, Secret Invasion. Those shows were completely filmed and everything, and then something happened, and they had to reevaluate the story and sometimes make an incredible amount of changes. For Secret Invasion, they had to redo almost everything. I think originally there's a rumor that the story was going to be about a war between Russia and Ukraine. But then in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but then of course the real war exploded, and they had to completely redo the entire story. The end result was very mediocre. Even though it starred Samuel L. Jackson, one of the biggest stars and one of the greatest actors that they had in the Marvel Universe, but it just didn't work. And the thing is, Star Wars had a similar problem with a diminishing return on investment. We had the sequels, and the first one was amazing. The Force Awakens feels just like Star Wars. Yeah, it was designed to be just like Star Wars. And then the second one was controversial. It was like, what's going on? This is not the Luke Skywalker that we thought we knew. However, it was still very innovative, groundbreaking. It did stuff that we had never seen in the Star Wars narrative universe. And then we get this hastily made, kind of rushed movie, The Rise of Skywalker, which I think still has a lot of redeeming aspects, but it wasn't on the kind of quality that a finale, a conclusion of this decade-spanning Skywalker saga deserved. And all this was caused by problems that were similar to what was going on in the Marvel universe, in a sense that they first had hired someone to write and to direct, was it Colin Trevorrow? To write and direct this last episode of the Skywalker saga, and then they saw what he came up with, and they didn't like it. And so they hired J.J. Abrams back, who was like, okay, well, I didn't expect to be back. And in fact, the previous movie, The Last Jedi, took the story in a totally different direction from what I thought, what I would have done. And so how am I going to make this U-turn and bring it back to my original ideas? And so that's why this third movie feels so contrived at times and so weird. Well, the problems for Star Wars also, when it comes to television, were similar in the sense that they at first started to make tons and tons of new television series, and they announced plans to the stakeholders like, oh, this is coming next, and then we're going to do this. But the problem was they weren't ready for it. It was just too much in too little time. And so a number of these television series were canceled even before they started shooting. There were some other projects like movies that were pushed way into the future, and well, Disney hasn't canceled any of those ideas formally, but it's still, very unlikely that we'll see any of those ideas come to fruition. And then some of the other television series just didn't pan out to be as good as they might have been had they given it more time and more care. One, I think, of the worst examples, unfortunately, was the Book of Boba Fett. Which I felt had a ton of potential, great actors, great chemistry, but especially the way in which the story ended was so kind of run-of-the-mill, cliche. It felt like it was a waste of the potential that that particular story had. And then Obi-Wan Kenobi was good, but it could have been a lot better if it had been a movie. The only exception to this was Andor. Andor, everybody agrees that Andor had the best writing we had ever seen in the Star Wars universe. And that was a surprise for Disney as well. They didn't think that people would appreciate that. They thought that the Star Wars fans would be much more enthusiastic about the Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi and now the Ahsoka series, because that's what they had done for a decade. And now all of a sudden everybody starts raving about Andor, which they kind of allowed to be made. But just like Rogue One, when that was in development, they didn't expect much of it. And now they're starting to realize, well, wait a minute, the Star Wars fans have actually evolved and matured, and we should have planned more of this. But instead, we already have this roster of upcoming projects that is... we committed to them, and we probably already invested millions into these upcoming projects. There is nothing like Andor on our timeline. So yes, we do have a second season that's still coming, but after that, nobody knows if there's going to be more Andor-like stuff. And so some Star Wars fans have been clamoring for a change of leadership at Disney when it comes to Star Wars. And this is an old gripe of a certain segment of the Star Wars fandom, where they keep circulating rumors that Kathleen Kennedy, who they see as the culprit of all this bad quality Star Wars, according to them, is going to be fired anytime now, and someone else will step in and take the reins and save Star Wars. And the latest rumor is that that person is going to be Kevin Feige, the one who has been leading the Marvel Cinematic Universe ever since Iron Man. And probably one of the reasons that they speculate about this is that Kevin Feige, a while ago, was seen as a potential writer-director for an upcoming Star Wars movie. He is very much a Star Wars fan. He's interested in moving that franchise forward, but the idea was that he would make a movie. Kathleen Kennedy even talked about that publicly, that she would love it if Kevin Feige could make a Star Wars movie. But Kevin Feige was so busy with Marvel and with the cinematic universe, and so much was going on there, that he just didn't have time. So according to this new rumor, Kevin Feige is ready to leave Marvel Studios and switch to Star Wars and take the reins from Kathleen Kennedy and guide Lucasfilm on a new path. And he would be, according to some of the fans, the savior of the Star Wars universe, because this man has proven to know how to build a consistent universe that the fans love. And he would never sanction and allow stupid projects in the eyes of some fans, childish stuff or stuff that is too woke or whatever. And people project on Kevin Feige so much that I wonder if he is actually someone who could pull that off, who could match all those expectations. It's, I think, very likely that if he were to take the reins at Lucasfilm, fans would still be disappointed and would find reasons to now start to clamor for his departure from Lucasfilm. The thing is, both these franchises are in development. We're watching these stories in a culture that is changing so rapidly. There's a new generation of moviegoers, of TV consumers, and they have different interests. Even the online world is changing so quickly from these massive social platforms like Twitter and Facebook, and now it seems as if the current trend is much more towards niche, and people don't want to have 30,000 followers anymore or go viral every day. No, people want to be more in smaller circles, and kind of like niche interests are more and more popular. I see this also in the world of books. I read a ton of books, and you see, a couple of years ago, everybody was reading the same big, young adult fantasy novels, and And now you see this explosion, and which has also an upside, and that is that a lot of smaller writers, unknown talents, can emerge and find a small portion of that fantasy fandom. And I think that with Star Wars, I wouldn't be surprised, and with Marvel, that the same trend will have a much bigger impact on the future of these two franchises than a change of directors. Because let's be honest, Kevin Feige has been successfully running the MCU, but he's still at the helm of the MCU now that Marvel is in trouble and doesn't really know how to proceed. And every movie seems to do worse than the previous one. And a lot of the television series have been canceled or postponed. So who tells me that since the same situation is more or less also the case when it comes to Star Wars, who tells me that he can all of a sudden change that? He's been part, maybe, of the problem. I have a great I have a great respect for people like Kevin Feige and Kathleen Kennedy, but I wonder if just changing positions within the same organization is going to bring the changes that these storytelling franchises need. I personally would prefer for Star Wars to go more niche, to do smaller budget productions, to maybe just step out of the whole rat race of trying to match fans' expectations and do something unexpected like they did for Andor. But maybe even go even lower budget than that. We should never forget where Star Wars comes from. A New Hope was considered to be a niche movie. It was almost like an art house movie. It had zero budget. Everybody thought that movie was going to fail. And it is within the limitations that Lucas was able to nurture his genius and his inventiveness, and he was able to make something out of nothing. And he was surrounded by a couple of people who had that same goal of, well, since nobody expects anything, let's see what we can do. And this is how Skywalker, not Skywalker Sound, Industrial Light and Magic was working on these groundbreaking special effects, but using basically plastic models and all sorts. They had to think completely out of the box to create what Lucas was imagining. And then you had George Lucas's ex-wife, who was an editor, and if it weren't for her, A New Hope would have been a terrible movie. She, in post-production, while editing, made A New Hope into what we now know it is. And so that was all done within the constraints of the situation at the time. Now that Star Wars seems to have unlimited money, I don't think that the organization is challenging itself enough, and it's very likely that the organization has become complacent, just like the church has been complacent especially during centuries where the church was prosperous and successful and powerful. And now that the church is so much in decline, it's almost an incentive for a new springtime where, well, you see what's happening in the Vatican. Pope Francis is trying to help the church to reinvent itself and take a totally different approach to the world around it, because what we've done for decades hasn't worked. So something needs to change. But the solution is not to think big and to just use a lot of money and political solutions. No, the solution is to, well, let's first listen to one another again. Let's see, what do we perceive is the will of the Holy Spirit? And are there ideas from people that nobody listens to? Shouldn't we listen more to the people on the fringes of the church? Maybe they have something to say. Well, let's listen to the poor. The church institutions in general have always been under control of the powerful. Well, let's listen to the people who don't have any power. What do they expect? What do they ask? I would love it if an organization like Disney could take a similar approach and maybe even learn from what is happening right now in the Catholic Church and go back to the fans and ask us, what did you love? What don't you like? What do you expect of us? And that's very risky. And that's probably why it won't happen. But I think it's so incredibly essential to listen to the fans. And maybe among the fans, you will discover new talent that is able to bring in new ideas, new blood, and reinvent what Star Wars can be for the future generations. But Star Wars cannot exist in a vacuum. These stories are here to serve us, the fans. And I am an older fan, but there is a younger generation that grows up with totally different worldview and other hopes and worries. And Star Wars needs to reflect those issues. And that's why Star Wars should not just cater to the old fans and just do what we always, liked about Star Wars. No, I think it's so important to listen to what's the younger generation looking for in our stories, and what do we need to tell in these stories to serve the basically mankind. That's ultimately what stories are all about. They're here to help us reflect on our reality in an imaginary world. It's easy to think about the big problems that we worry about if we first travel to this galaxy far, far away, because then we can just experiment with things and we can pick and choose and see, I like that idea. And so anyway, my advice to Disney would be just leave Kevin Feige where he is. He's doing a tremendous job, and leave Kathleen Kennedy in place, but make sure that don't just listen to the people at the top. Don't just listen to your wallet, but listen to what the people actually ask of you, and see if you can find new talent and bring them in and give them a position in your company so that they can do what the old guard can do. That would be my advice. Let's move on.
The most beloved fantasy story of all time. It is the tale of a small hobbit and the great wizard who appeared to him one day.
All right, dude, check it out. Go like that way, and then up this one mountain, and then kill all the hippies you come across.
No, I'm searching for a dragon's treasure.
I'm the wizard, you're the dwarf, and you will respect my authority.
So the last,
am no dwarf.
Sorry about that. I was interrupting the Hobbit. In the last episode of the break, I was talking about this upcoming project about the War of the Rohirrim, which is a Peter Jackson-led animated movie that will come out in December next year. And then that's, of course, not the only Tolkien-related story that we can look forward to. Right now, in production, is the second season of The Rings of Power. And I really miss being in Middle-earth. I tried to compensate for that by reading a bit more in the Silmarillion. There's an excellent audiobook version, in case you missed that, read by Andy Serkis, who, of course, voices and plays Gollum in The Lord of the Rings and in The Hobbit. But Andy Serkis is also an incredible voice actor, and he had already recorded the Lord of the Rings trilogy and also The Hobbit, and now he has recorded the Silmarillion, and it is the best audio version I've ever heard of the Silmarillion. Silmarillion is one of the more difficult books to read because it covers such an incredible amount of time in the history of Middle-earth, and because it covers so much history. There are so many different eras and kings and names and elves and whatnot to get to know. And even though the Silmarillion at times focuses on a few particular stories, there's still this overall. It kind of feels like you're trying to read the Old Testament, but so far you are only familiar with the New Testament, with the stories of Jesus and the apostles. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, this is insane. I thought it was just one book, but the Old Testament is like, I don't know, It's too many books, too many stories, too much history, too many names. I cannot possibly take all that in. This is why, by the way, the Catholic Church is helping people to read parts of the Old Testament by portioning it. So every week on Sunday, we get just one portion of the Old Testament, one story, and then it's usually thematically linked to the gospel, which a lot of people are more familiar with, so that at least you recognize some of the themes in the gospel in the New Testament readings in the Old Testament. And so with the Silmarillion, I have always had the same impression, like, oh my gosh, it's so overwhelming. And I tried to get through the book and didn't get very far, but that was not because I wasn't interested. It's just that the book is not written as an adventure story. It's more like a history book. And this is where Andy Serkis has really helped me to get a better grip on the stories of the Silmarillion, because the way in which he reads it is very much like a storyteller. And even very dull stuff, like there's a huge introduction to the Silmarillion, which I always skipped. It was like, written by Christopher Tolkien, and it's a lot of like, this is how the Silmarillion came about, lots of details, and very interesting probably to the Tolkien scholars, but I just want to dive into the story. Well, when I was listening to the audiobook version by Andy Serkis, I was mesmerized by that introduction. I actually really, really enjoyed it. He's got such an amazing talent to bring text alive. And so what I'm trying to do in order to prepare myself for the next season of The Rings of Power, and that is still months and months away, is I want to read through the Silmarillion with Andy Serkis. And because I've seen, after having watched the first season of Rings of Power, how much the Silmarillion is, how important that is to understanding what is happening, and also to understand the choices that the creators of Rings of Power have made. There is, I think, a lot of undue criticism on the Rings of Power by people that say, well, it's not faithful to what Tolkien would have written or wanted. But I'm pretty convinced that what they show us in The Rings of Power is a condensed version of history, but they announced that at the get-go. They said, this is a television series. We cannot introduce new characters. We cannot move through time as the Silmarillion does. It's not the same medium. We need to have consistent characters that people can follow from season to season, but we will try to stay as close as possible to the main storylines in the history of Middle-earth. And they actually had the obligation to not contradict Tolkien's works in any way. So the only concession that was made by the Tolkien estate was this time compression, and that some of the characters were taking on lines and roles and situations from other eras. But already Peter Jackson did that in The Lord of the Rings, where he took some stuff, even from the Silmarillion, in a very sly way, because he wasn't allowed to use the Silmarillion, but he used some of his knowledge of the Silmarillion in the way that, for instance, Arwen, the character of Arwen, was developed. Arwen is just barely present, I think, in The Lord of the Rings, but in the movies, they used a lot of the themes from another power couple between an elf and a human in the Silmarillion, and then transposed that onto the relationship between Aragorn and Arwen, and to great effect. That was a wonderful addition to the story, especially because The Lord of the Rings is, lacks strong female characters in the original book, and I'm very glad that Peter Jackson at least tried to introduce more strong female characters in his version of The Lord of the Rings. So I have no problem with the Rings of Power doing the same for storytelling purposes. You cannot do something that just literally follows the books. Tolkien never wrote his books as a script for a TV series. This is also why I'm a bit worried about the Harry Potter remake that Warner has announced, where apparently they're going to be very close to the original text of the books. But those books were not written as scripts for a television series. In fact, J.K. Rowling has now shown in Fantastic Beasts that she is not a very good scriptwriter. She doesn't really understand television that well, or movies, I should say. And so I have my doubts, but probably they'll just hire a lot of talent to make sure that it becomes a success, because there's a lot at stake for Warner. But anyway, for as far as the Rings of Power are concerned, the more I read in the Silmarillion, the more I understand why the Rings of Power is what it is and why certain story choices were made. So that's my fantasy plan for the upcoming, well, probably month or so. Oh.
Japanimation. Cool.
Let's wrap things up with a quick visit to the world of anime. I'm still watching this amazing historical animated series about Vinland. Vinland was a surname for the United States, given by the Vikings. As you know, the Vikings from Scandinavia, now of course that's Sweden and Norway and Denmark, they were incredible boatspeople, and they traveled not just to mainland Europe but also to England, and they left a mark on many cultures. But we also know from historical research that they were the ones who first discovered the United States, long before Christopher Columbus did, and they called it Vinland. And the story in Vinland Saga follows a young boy, Thorfinn, whose father has been murdered by Askeladd, who's a very bad guy, kind of half Viking, half Welsh, I think he is. Anyway, he's really the bad guy, and this young boy wants to avenge his father, and unfortunately ends up traveling with his arch rival, with his murderer of his father, because one day he wants to challenge this guy in a duel and then ultimately kill him. So he grows up and becomes more and more violent because he's surrounded by violence and warfare, and he accompanies these Vikings on their pillaging travels. And so in episode 5, was it 5? We see this kind of change of tone where he is in England, in the south of England, so Anglia it was called, and he gets wounded. He's being pursued by soldiers. He's still a boy. He must be like 12 years old or something like that. And so he has been shot with a bow and arrow and is left for dead. And then the next morning, he is discovered by an old lady and her granddaughter. And they take him home, and they take care of him so that he can heal. And this is where something really amazing happened in the series. Until that moment, it was all about, the horrors of the wars and about this gruesome murder of Thorfinn's father. And you see this boy who is just like, there's so much emotion in him, and he's now almost orphaned. His mother and sister are still there in Iceland, because that's where he originally is from. But he is so far away from home, and is just surrounded by all these violent people. But this is for the first time that he meets people from a totally different culture. This small family is Christian, is Catholic. And this is in the time that this part of England was heavily influenced by the growth of the monasteries. So the Benedictine monks were founding monasteries all over the country, and they were actually helped and stimulated by King Edgar at the time, who was also a devout Christian, and also he was partially Viking. He had like a Viking ancestry and an English ancestry. He was even married a Danish princess, and under his reign there was a lot of peace between these early Scandinavian settlers who initially just invaded Anglia to pillage the villages and the monasteries, but then a lot of them were staying behind and started to found families, and so they settled there. And there was this long time of relative peace, and a lot of these Scandinavian Vikings were converting to Christianity. They were so impressed that despite the fact that they came there as invaders, as the enemy, these people, these Christians, were so kind and charitable. And so that convinced them that Christianity actually was maybe something that they would want to embrace. And so that happened. So in this particular episode, they don't know that the boy is a Viking yet, because he is just wounded and hungry, and so you have this small conversation. Let's take a listen.
What's your name, child? Where do you come from? Where's your family?
I knew it. He doesn't understand a word we're saying. Do you think he's a Dane?
And what if he is, dear? It doesn't matter. If I left an injured child lying there, Jesus would never forgive me.
But Mother, the Danes are England's enemy, aren't they? Father was drafted into the army because they're the ones who attacked our homeland.
And what's your point? That is a quarrel between men. Women and children aren't obligated to get involved.
Maybe you're right, but still.
And so this was so surprising to me that they make room in this story for this, I think, beautiful Christian gesture of pity and mercy of this old woman and her granddaughter towards this child. And then the story takes a very dark turn afterwards. But I was looking up, I was intrigued, and I was wondering, is this just fantasy? Is this a story, or how historical is this? So I did some research for a TikTok video that I'm also going to put probably on my YouTube anime channel as well. And I was just stunned at how accurate this depiction of the situation was. And I think that this first encounter between Thorfinn, when he's still very young, and these Christians in Anglia will have a major influence on his life in the future. You can tell that this boy is still at the beginning of a long journey, a physical journey, but also an inner journey, because his father was killed because he didn't want to fight. And now this boy is turning towards violence to avenge his father. But you feel that, well, that's not going to be the solution. Violence only gives way to more violence. So maybe these two women here have planted a seed that will ultimately also change the heart of this young boy, Thorfinn. I'm only at episode 7 right now in the first season, so I've got a lot of other episodes to discover. But I'm eager to see where the creators are going to take this story. And in the meantime, I'll share it with you here on the podcast and on my YouTube and TikTok channels. And with that, it is time to wrap things up. Hope you enjoyed this short break. And if you would like to listen to the premium version of this podcast, you know what to do. Just join my wonderful community of patrons. It's only $2.50 per month, and your contribution is used to continue this work, to create more of these shows and videos, and to do more research. And even if you are not able to support me financially, you can still join the Patreon community. It is now also free, and you will be able to read everything I post on the Patreon website. And whenever I have something new, whether it is a video or a podcast or I write an article, you can find it there. So this is a very easy way to stay informed. So go to patreon.com/fatherrick, patreon.com/Father Roderick, and join the community for free. And if you can, also become a sponsor and get premium episodes of my podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon. God bless.
Why are you wearing glasses?
Reading.
Reading? I didn't know you could read.
It's time to talk about books, and I read such an interesting book that will also lead me to the next segment. And the book is called Star Trek Psychology. I will include a link in the show notes. And this is a book written from the perspective of psychology, going through the history of Star Trek, looking for all sorts of psychological themes and problems and certain types of mental problems and solutions. It's such an interesting book. It's an unauthorized book, of course, and there are various books in this genre. There's also, of course, the science of Star Trek, and I think there's even a book called The Gospel of Star Trek. So a big franchise like that with hundreds of stories always lends itself to these kind of analysis or approaches from different angles. And this one was really interesting. The first part of the book is a bit generic, and it just shows you all sorts of areas of psychology illustrated by stories and characters in Star Trek. But then the more you read, the more interesting it becomes. And at one point, they're talking about neurodivergent people in Star Trek, or at least characters that seem to represent neurodivergent people in Star Trek. You've got Data, you've got Spock, and they display certain characteristics that are very similar to people with autism or ADHD, etc., etc. And also some of the villains clearly are not just villainous because they're evil, but sometimes they just suffer from psychological issues. And, well, unfortunately, they usually don't have regular appointments with counselors, but they should go see a therapist. It would make the universe a lot safer if they would. And there's also at one point, so the book is written by various authors, I think are working in the field of psychology. So there's also an assessment of Counselor Troy, on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they analyze the kind of work that she does. And the conclusion is, well, she's not really a therapist. And it's actually quite miraculous that sometimes people will solve their problems just by having a chat, like a 5-minute chat with her. And the only thing that she seems to be able to do is to listen and to just mirror what people are telling her. Of course, she's an empath. She's able also to sense emotions, etc. But it's nothing that a psychologist would be able to discern just asking a few the right questions. So it was very interesting to read that assessment of the function of Counselor Troy on the bridge. And of course, later on, we also meet doctors like the holographic doctor, who also sometimes acts like a therapist. And then the book becomes more philosophical. And it's like, well, speaking of this holographic doctor, you see that he starts to evolve. At first, he's just seen as an emergency program by the Voyager crew. They cut him off. They don't take him seriously. If he becomes too obnoxious, they just shut him down. But then over time, first of all, the Doctor himself is evolving more and more because, well, he is just an emergency hologram. But since he's always on, since the Voyager ship is lost in the Delta Quadrant, he learns much more from the people that he's treating than other holographic counterparts would. And the more he learns and the more he deals with humans, the more he becomes human himself. And so this goes all the way to the point where he becomes almost independent. He can walk around beyond the medical headquarters on the ship, because they give him like I think a personal, individual holographic projector or something like that. And so this resembles what is happening also with Data, who is an android, but is so interested in human behavior that ultimately he strives to become like a human, and he gets this emotion chip, and then that adds a totally new dimension. What does that really make him a human being? Does that give him the dignity of a person? That's a very interesting philosophical question. As you know, there's one episode in The Next Generation where he's put on trial, and the whole episode is about, is this android a person or not? Because he acts like a person, he behaves like us, but still, he's just a machine. Or is he? Is he more than that? And it extrapolates that discussion when it comes to artificial intelligence. And we're, of course, our current boom in artificial intelligence evolution was after this book was written. But they're already talking about what if in the future computers can act and talk like human beings? If is self-awareness, is that exclusive to human beings? Are certain animals able to be self-aware? Are artificial beings able to become self-aware? And then should that also imply that we treat these machines differently? Very, very interesting questions. At one point, they're even talking about the representation of divine beings in Star Trek. And that was such an eye-opening segment of the book, where they say, well, it's funny that if you want to portray either a divine being or a super human or like a superhero, it is very important that this superior being only has a few characteristics that are different from us. But most of what you want to see in someone who is a superior entity has to somehow resemble you. Otherwise, you cannot relate to it. And they give the example, what if in the Star Trek universe, they would encounter a divine being who looks like a small pig, and he's got these little horns, and he make like sounds. Nobody would say, "Oh, that's a god." No, how do we portray? How do we picture a god? Even in our Christian imagery of God, we portray God the Father as a guy with a beard, gray hair. He is white. He's sitting on a cloud. The angels look like us. They're just little cute babies with butterfly wings. But of course, if you look at theology, it's totally different. Nowhere in theology it says that God looks like us. No, we are made in God's image, but it doesn't mean that God looks like us physically, that he's a man with a beard. We call him Father, but in an analog way, in a sense that it is similar maybe to the way we the attributes of fathers in our world, but God is totally different from us. And so it's very important to always to never step into the pitfall of thinking that God is just another being, just a superior being. That's why theology says God isn't a being. He is not created. He is the creator. But that makes him essentially different from us. We are creatures. We're physical and spiritual beings, but God is not a being. He is. And so anyway, that's a whole different discussion, but it was so interesting to realize that, yes, in fact, that's what we do if we want to depict God. He's always a big guy. We want someone who is like us, but a little bit better than us. This is also why superheroes are usually like bodybuilders and beautiful people. And there are very few superheroes who just look like, I don't know, like dwarves or something like that. And even dwarves kind of look like us anyway. So really interesting book, Star Trek Psychology. It was a joy to read.
I need help.
You need a teacher. I can't teach you.
Maybe the internet has the information I need.
You know what I learned from the internet?
I understand that you learned a few new things.
There really is so much to learn.
There's so much to learn. And one of the areas where I sometimes go for inspiration is Pinterest. I'm not a big user of Pinterest. It was and is very big among certain groups in society. And I never felt that I was part of the target audience. I do get X/Twitter or Mastodon or Facebook or TikTok, but I've never been very engaged on Pinterest, nor am I very active on LinkedIn, even though I know that those networks are huge for a lot of people. And Pinterest, of course, is more of an image-based social platform where people can share, for instance, like if you want to create a mood board, which is, say you want to repaint your living room and you're looking for inspiration when it comes to colors and what type of curtains or what kind of furniture do I want to have, you can go to Pinterest and just type in some words and then just gather a number of the photos that you see in that area and then just put them all together in a mood board. And maybe none of those photos will show exactly your living room, but it gives you an idea. Like I'm looking at my studio right now. I'm looking around and all my walls are kind of boring. They're all gray. Yeah, my background is nice because it's bookshelves, but the rest of the room is actually quite boring. So if I ever want to paint this in different colors, I would go to Pinterest and find some inspiration for, well, we could also use this color or that color. So I used this platform recently for a video game that I've been playing for maybe 10 years. It's one of those simple games on the iPad and on iOS. It's called The Simpsons Tapped Out. And it's one of those city building games where you just have to click on buildings and then you get some virtual money and then you can buy other buildings and create streets and you can collect all sorts of characters from the Simpsons. It's a lot of fun, and they do these events where there's a storyline. So for instance, for Halloween, they always have like the Treehouse of Horror storyline where you have to help Springfield, and in the winter it snows, and so all the buildings are covered in snow. It's a lot of fun. And what I've been doing for years and years and years was just collect. I was collecting buildings, I was collecting Simpsons characters, and whenever I got a new building, I just put it somewhere on the map. The idea of the game was that you could rebuild Springfield. And you could make a totally different Springfield and just create. The idea was you can now use these buildings to create a nice looking town, and I never did because I always like, oh no, but I first need this other building, and I'm now collecting another character from a Simpsons episode, and I just never took the time to do what the game actually wants me to do, and that is to build my own Simpson world. And recently, I finally was at the point where I thought, I've been gathering stuff for years, but isn't the fun isn't it more fun to actually start creating a city or a Simpsons world? So that's what I started to do, and it turned out to be very difficult. How do you create a city from scratch? And so I had to think about this, and this is where Pinterest really helped me. I was looking at what other players of the same game had done. And so you see these close-ups of like an area where someone had created Central Park. And I thought, that's such a brilliant idea. Just because you have so many buildings and you can just build neighborhoods, but what if I start with this park? I want my world to have this big rectangular park that extends from the sea all the way to an inner city, and then I'm just going to create Manhattan there. I'm going to put all the large, tall buildings around the park, and then I'm going to create neighborhoods. So I've got a German neighborhood, an Italian neighborhood. I even have the Vatican. There, at one point, you were able to buy the St. Peter's Basilica. So I have St. Peter's Basilica, and then I'm thinking, well, you know what? I should create Trastevere. I have some more Italian houses, so I'll create on the left of the Vatican, I'll create Trastevere. And that helped me so much to think on the basis of like other cities that I visited. So I had some French buildings. I had the Eiffel Tower. I had what's the name of that big thing? The Arc de Triomphe. And so I looked at maps, at aerial maps of Paris, and I'm thinking, oh, cool. So the Eiffel Tower, and then you have this park, and then you have the river. Wait, I already had created a river for the Vatican, the Tiber. What if I move that river around the bend, and then it can flow, and it can turn into the Thames, and then I'll just put some English buildings and the House of Parliament and Buckingham Palace around that part of the river, and then the river can change into the Seine in Paris, and I'll just put the Eiffel Tower there, and that river became like the guiding principle for my world building. So I now have that first inner city. I've got Manhattan, I've got London, I've got Paris, and I've got Italy or Rome and the Vatican. And now I'm starting to move to the outer edges of the city, and that's where you have the kind of the regular neighborhoods and the sports area, and then maybe I'll even create like a part of it, like the North Pole. I've got a lot of Santa Claus themed buildings, and you know what? It's so much fun. It's like what I loved to do as a child was to build my miniature train. How'd you say that? Train worlds. I didn't have that much rails or locomotives or anything, but I dreamt of having this room full of small trains and houses with lights in it. And I still want to do that with my Lego buildings. I really would like to create like a winter village. But in order to get going, I'm first starting with Simpsons Tapped Out and creating a sprawling city using all these things that I've gathered over the years. It's a lot of fun. And also, it forces me to throw away a lot of this stuff because sometimes these buildings just don't fit my vision of what Springfield should look like. So I just discard them, even though it may have taken me months to save for that one house. But you know what? It's too much clutter. Let's get rid of it. So hopefully that will also help me to declutter in my day-to-day life, in real life. All right. Another thing that I learned online is what I'm going to prepare for dinner tonight. In fact, right after I'm done recording this podcast, I'm going to work on this. And this is chicken drumsticks. So I bought 5 chicken drumsticks yesterday. They were 70% off. They usually do that towards the end of the day. You know, they know that it's approaching its expiration date, and they only have 1 hour to get rid of it. So instead of throwing it away, they will just discount it heavily. And I know exactly when they're doing that. So I usually go to the store around 8 o'clock, and I just snatch away all these, heavily discounted ingredients. So I now have chicken drumsticks, and chicken drumsticks are always a bit boring in the sense that I like chicken, but I put them in the air fryer and I rub some herbs on them, but it always kind of tastes the same. Plus, I don't know if it's the air fryer that does this, but it has a lot of cartilage, which is like it doesn't become very soft. And I know that I've had chicken at restaurants and with friends, and their drumsticks were so soft and so tasty. And so I looked up some videos on how to marinate these drumsticks, and I found a recipe that is super simple but also surprised me, because the marinade is made with buttermilk. And I was like, wait, I know that buttermilk, we have that in the Netherlands as well. It's kind of this sour yogurt type drink. Are you really going to, use that as a marinade for chicken? And I verified it with Inge, and she said, no, that's actually the acidity of the buttermilk helps to break down the tougher parts of the chicken and makes it much more tender. Plus, it will also moisturize the chicken. So according to the recipe, you have to first marinate that for about half an hour in the fridge with buttermilk and then herbs and salt and whatnot. And then you break some eggs, and you use cornflakes. You have to create all these cornflakes crumbles. You put the eggs in one plate and then the cornflakes on another plate. And so you take the chicken from the buttermilk. You first dip it in flour, just plain flour. And that will probably seal the pores of the meat. Then it goes through the egg. And this, of course, is the yolks. You have to how do you say that? Stir the yolks and whatnot. So it then is in egg, and then it goes in onto the plate with the cornflakes, and then you fry it. So I don't know if I'm going to put it in real oil or in the air fryer. I'll probably try both to see. Probably the air fryer, it may get a little bit too dry, but then you fry it, and then it becomes it looks like Kentucky Fried Chicken. So I was getting so hungry just by watching that video. So that's what I'm going to prepare tonight. Long live the internet for letting me discover all these new recipes. If you have any recipes to share, let me know, of course, on in the kitchen area of our Discord server. Thank you so much for joining me for this hour. Hope you enjoyed the show. And as always, love to continue the conversation on Discord, in the community, or in the chat room. This may be new to some of you, but the Patreon app also has a chat. And some of you find it much easier to use than Discord. Discord, you have to install a program, and it's like a bit overwhelming. But Patreon has one chat, and you can always reach me there. I check it several times a week, and that's where you can also post things or ask questions or give feedback. So I highly encourage you to at least take a look. I'm still working on developing the Patreon site a bit more in the near future, posting some more stories there as well. And I'm encouraging people that follow me on TikTok to also join the Patreon community for free. There is like of course, the lowest tier is $2.50, but you can also now join the Patreon site or community without financial support. Then, of course, you won't get the premium podcast, but you will be able to get notified whenever I post something new on Patreon. So check it out and talk to you soon. God bless.